are you Mike? Okay, good.
I'm here. I just started it at 7 a.m. or 7 p.m. Sorry.
Excellent. All right, thank you. Thanks to Nikki, our Zoom czar, for efficiently running this tech for us so that we can keep doing these meetings and presentations in spite of everything that's going on around the world. We can all stay safe and look forward to the day when we can meet in person again. Welcome everybody to the first meeting of our new year for Mendocino Coast Audubon Society. We've had a couple of months off, but we just had our board planning meeting just about a month ago, and I think everyone came away pretty well fired up and ready to take on a bunch of new projects, and it was a really fun meeting, and we have an ambitious agenda ahead of us, so it's going to be a fun year, I think. And of course, we're still coping with the restrictions on things that we can and can't do safely, but we have started our bird walks and field trips. We've been carrying on the bird walks at the Mendocino Coast Botanical Gardens all summer long, and we just had a field trip for the first time in a year. And that brings me to another topic, which is at our board meeting, we introduced a new board member who I don't think is logged in tonight. Roger? No. Anyway, Roger Adamson, fairly well known, I think, to many of you, has agreed to join the board and accepted the position of board secretary. And he's already performed very well in that role, and a great addition to the board in many ways. So I'm really happy to have him with us. And also an off-board member, Tess McGuire, agreed to serve as field trips coordinator, which I was super happy about because I've been doing that for years and years and years, and it became too much to try to do that and be president at the same time. David Jensen was able to do that for years. He run all the field trips and be the board president at the same time, but he's just better at this than I am. So I needed help, and Tess stepped up, and I want to thank her and introduce her to all of you. And Tess, do you want to unmute yourself and tell us maybe very briefly a little bit about the field trip we had this month, and then what you have some plans coming up for October?
Yeah, I can do that. We went, what was it, Saturday before last?
Yeah.
Whenever. We went to Ward Avenue. We walked the beach. We had a good time. We saw snowy plovers. We saw a bunch of other, I just got back from a trip and I can't remember anything that would happen before that. So the joys of getting older. But yeah, we had beautiful weather. We saw a bunch of birds, and I think everybody had a good time. And we are thinking of doing a big day on October 9th. I think that's eBird had organized that. And a bunch of other organizations are taking part of it. So I'm thinking we'd start at the 10 Mile River early in the morning, around 7:30. I'm going to post a couple other times along the way. So if not everybody wants to start that early, they can join us later on. And we'll just keep going down the coast, as far as energy and time will allow us.
Awesome. It's a cool idea. Something new.
Yeah.
I love it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
There will be more information about that in the newsletter, which will come out right about the 1st of October. So that'll give you a little bit of time to prepare.
I'll have a little write-up together tomorrow or
Excellent.
Wednesday. Yeah.
And of course, you can always find information up to date on our website, mendocinocoastaudubon.org. Speaking of 10 Mile, this last Saturday was Coastal Cleanup Day, and Art Morley coordinated a team. Jackie is pointing him out even as I speak. The legendary Art Morley once again coordinated the Mendocino Coast Audubon Coastal Cleanup Team, I believe at 10 Mile. Is that right, Art?
That's right.
All right. And that went pretty well?
Yeah, pretty well. I sent you a summary.
Yeah, the interesting thing to me was, and this seemed to me like good news, was there was less trash than normal, or
Right.
I don't know if you'd call it normal, but less trash than usual. So the cleanup went easier than usual. And that's good. There are a couple of good signs in the environment recently. As many of you have noticed, the kelp is back, and it's been back now long enough that even some of the news media is beginning to notice. And it's an interesting scientific story because it caught most of the scientists researching the kelp forest completely by surprise. So we'll be, I'm going to try to keep on top of that and see if we can get some more information about that, maybe into a future newsletter article. I think that's about all that I need to talk about right now. Unless anyone has questions, I think that we should probably get started with our presentation tonight, because this is something I have been looking forward to for a very long time. As some of you know, who have been on bird walks with me, I am wont to lecture at frequent intervals about the benefits of standing dead trees, but I always wanted to get someone who was a little more knowledgeable about it to speak to the chapter. And so big tip of the hat to Tara and Haley for lining up the programs for this coming season and starting off with a great one about the benefits of standing dead timber. Our guest tonight is Gillian Martin, who has spent the last 20 years advocating for birds. So she is an Audubon member herself, her tribe here. But she established something called the Cavity Conservation Initiative to encourage the safe retention of dead trees as habitat. And so I am really happy to have her tonight speaking to us about the habitat value of standing dead trees. Gillian Martin, welcome to the Mendocino Coast Audubon Society. Whoopsie, you're muted.
Right, thank you, Tim. I've looked forward to this all day. It's such a joy for me to know I'm with my people, you know. Yes. And everyone, thank you for joining. I appreciate it. I'm speaking from my home office in Laguna Niguel, California. So that's real Southern California. And I always feel like I'm coming home when I'm speaking with an Audubon chapter. And I know that probably many of you already understand some of this stuff, or get it what's in your head about dead trees, but perhaps it's in little bits and pieces, like a jigsaw puzzle. And so I'm going to try and gather together all and maybe throw in a few more things that might be new to you, so that we can together put a bright spotlight on the habitat value of dead trees and become advocates for them whenever it's appropriate to do so. Okay, so I'm gonna screen share now. Let's hope all goes well. There we go. All right, so let's see here. I need to, will this go? Yes, there we go. Okay, so I am going to just start by reviewing what I hope to cover with you. So just a little bit about the historical role of dying and dead trees as nature intended them before we came along. And I guess I need to disclose that I'm going to be speaking mainly about dead and dying trees in the urban forest, the urban landscape, because that's where I work, and that's where I have an opportunity to maybe impact some decisions, and I hope you can too. Then I'm going to talk about the pivotal role played by primary excavators, which are woodpeckers. Then I'm going to talk about the many associations wildlife have with dead trees and some considerations when selecting them and manage a habitat tree. All right, so this illustration is really designed to point out a tree's habitat value over time. When many people consider a tree and its habitat value, they usually think in terms of a healthy, mature tree, as this, the third one on the left is, right? And of course, that's true that the trees provide a lot of, they're at the prime of, in the prime of their health and maturity, they do provide a lot of habitat. So, and I know you know how birds use trees, so we won't go into that. But what happens is that when a tree starts to decline for whatever reason, as we see here in this middle tree, many people start to think that, oh, that tree is, it's on its way out and it's losing its value and I better watch it. Maybe it needs to come down pretty soon. So what I'm here to suggest, and science will back me up, is that when a tree starts to do this, and then if it's allowed to remain in place and do this and this and this, in fact, the tree then serves many more wildlife, diverse species of wildlife than it ever did when it was like this. Because there's a whole suite of organisms waiting to use a tree when it starts to decline. So when we remove a tree, but pardon the term prematurely, that's my bias speaking, when we remove a tree prematurely and we cut it down to its stump, think about this. We deprive the tree of its very commendable destiny, its second life. I always tell arborists, I work with the tree care industry. I tell them, I said, a tree has two lives, one when it's growing and healthy and mature, and another one entirely when it starts to decline. So we need to respect, what nature had in mind for trees and the contribution that they make to the ecosystem when they start to decline. And let's consider this, it can take some trees, say example like oaks, 50 or hundreds of years to die, depending on the climate in which it exists, right? So when we remove a tree prematurely and haul all its parts away, look at all the habitat value and benefits that we're hauling away in the process. So there are a whole suite of organisms whose job is to cull weak trees and to get them ready for their final resting place, which is soil, right? So they are like, here's a list of them. Now I have to confess, I am not terribly knowledgeable about all these organisms, but I've read a fair amount and I hear the arboriculture talking about them because I attend many of their workshops. They are bark and wood boring beetles, clear-winged boring moths, wood wasps, termites, and flies. There are species in these families and categories whose job is to break down dead trees. But they're not the only ones with that role. I know you know this. There's saprophytic fungi whose job it is to break down dead and decaying matter so that the tree's nutrients can be returned to the soil. But the cool thing is that the fruiting bodies of a fungus, which many people refer to as mushrooms, right? You see them on dead trees, I'm sure, down wood. They're sometimes like little mini ecosystems. You can see on the left image here, we have a bunch of flies. I don't know what species they are, but I do know from my reading that there are a whole suite of organisms that feed on the fruiting bodies of fungi, that nest inside them. There are some that go into the fruiting bodies to prey on those that are already there. And we have, insects like spiders who sling their webs under these little fleshy canopies because they know somehow that insects are coming and going. And let's add to that the fruiting bodies of fungi are often food for many, many wildlife, everything from rodents all the way up to deer and bear in some cases, depending on the species. So, besides breaking down wood, look at what fungi does to the ecosystem. So of course, when trees are injured, right, for lots of different reasons, trees get injured, even just by putting a nail in a tree. Sometimes we injure the tree and let bacteria and fungal spores and pathogens get in there. Well, when a tree gets injured, decay starts to form because of all these organisms that get in there, and they form cavities. Now, if we're lucky enough to have a very large tree that lives a very long time, we have large cavities like this. And these large cavities, of course, serve mammals that are larger, like small and medium-sized mammals. Apparently, in some trees, some of the cavities are so large that even a bear can nest den in there. But you know, the barn owl is a good example of a large bird species, cavity nesting species that will take advantage of these large cavities. But of course, decay occurs in limbs, even in living trees. You know this, and of course, the tree care providers come along if the limb is in a place where it might fail and hurt somebody or damage property. They come and they cut it off completely, don't they? And in doing so, very often when they do that, they reveal the decay inside the limb. So look, they're giving birds some benefit, right? Cavity nesting birds will often take advantage of that exposed decay. It's almost like the hardwood rot that occurs in the trunks of trees. Of course, this is the European starling. I'm sure you recognize them, and you may not be too thrilled to see them here, but you know, these bits of decay in dead limbs serve many other wildlife birds besides starlings. All right, so decay can also occur in roots, you know, and at the base of trees, and form large cavities there as well, which provide dens for some mammals and you know, even some places where some can breed. So we have cavities that form thanks to decay in all parts of a tree. But as you know, the primary excavators, who we know as woodpeckers, excavate their own cavities. They do not use naturally formed cavities. And where woodpeckers are present in a forest, a natural forest system, or even in some urban forests, that is usually an indicator that the health of that forest is better, or, you know, pretty good. And there's more diversity in that forest if a woodpecker is there. And here I'm going to try to unfold the story as to why. So by being obsessive excavators of cavities, and woodpeckers excavate cavities not only for nesting, but for roosting. So they can make several in a year. A scientific study indicated that woodpeckers in North America provide about 77% of nesting cavities used by non-excavators. So non-excavators being the secondary cavity nesters that do not have the anatomy suitable for excavating a whole cavity, right? And those are some of these that I'm going to show you here on the side, well, all of them really. And we have about 80 cavity nesting birds in North America. Of them, we have 20 woodpeckers. We no longer consider the ivory-billed woodpecker, you know, as a lot. You know, we think they're extinct. So we have 20 woodpeckers in North America, and we have about 10. My little thing is hiding this. I think we have 7 ducks that nest in tree cavities, and some of those cavities are natural ones, of course, large cavities if they're lucky enough to find one, but made by the pileated woodpecker. The pileated woodpecker is so large that it makes large cavities, enough for many ducks to nest in there. So then we have 10 owls that are cavity nesters. And of course, the small ones will inherit the vacated homes of woodpeckers. We have 2 falcons, and we have 40 songbirds that are cavity nesting species. So where woodpeckers are present, you know, many of those birds can sometimes nest and survive in that habitat. I thought you'd enjoy this little scene here. This is a downy woodpecker that was nesting in a tree at the San Joaquin Wildlife Sanctuary, where our sea and sage Audubon is housed. So, gosh, I almost thought about deleting these 2 slides because I know you know them. So I'm just giving you a couple of examples of urban primary cavity nesters found in low elevations in California. So obviously, you know about the acorn woodpecker, the downy that we just saw, the Nuttall's woodpecker, which is a highly urbanized woodpecker. I'm just so grateful we have this woodpecker in our area in California. And of course, there is the northern flicker, right, which is our terrestrial woodpecker. And it's the weakest of excavators, but they do excavate in dead trees, of course. And they're the ones that forage primarily on the ground. And so the secondary cavity nesters that are common, at least where we are, and I suspect where you are the western bluebird, right? The tree swallow when there are bodies of water nearby to provide them with the aerial insects they need. The western screech owl, which is commonly found in riparian areas, but sometimes even in neighborhoods that are tree rich, right? And the pesky little house wren, and I say pesky little house wren because the house wren is, apart from being the most abundant cavity nester in North America, I call it pesky because it is highly aggressive to any bird nesting in its territory. So it commonly destroys the eggs of other cavity nesting birds and of open cup nesters. They are not obligate cavity nesters, the house wren. They will nest almost anywhere where there's some kind of enclosure. They'll even nest in a pocket door, abandoned. And so I'll just add a little PS here. If you're inclined to put up nest boxes, I would discourage you from putting up nest boxes for like bluebirds and other cavity nesting species if you're thinking about house wren habitat, because those nests will not likely survive with the house wren around. Okay, so get back to our wonderful woodpeckers. So I want to mention some of the other ecosystem roles that woodpeckers play, apart from making cavities, which have become available to other cavity nesting species. So woodpeckers are major insect managers. And so they reduce insects by what we call habitat partitioning. Now that's just a fancy word, but what that means is that woodpecker species share the whole habitat or ecosystem, the trophic sort of level, by foraging for insects at all levels, in the landscape. There's no one woodpecker that exclusively forages in only one substrate, but there are some that tend to prefer certain substrates for their insects. So some will grab insects in flight, we call them aerial foragers. Some will glean insects from foliage. Also, there are woodpeckers that specialize, like the small ones, the downy and the nuttalls, that will glean insects from the surface of bark and from just behind loose bark. The nuttalls, I know, also bores into wood a little bit. And then there are others that bore deeper into wood for to reach the grubs in the beetle galleries, that the wood boring beetles lay their eggs in there and they have grubs, right, as they mature. And then we have the pileated woodpecker, for heaven's sake, that gets way into trees to go after the carpenter ants. And our terrestrial woodpecker, the northern flicker, specializes in insects in the ground, especially ants, ant nests, and they feed on beetles and other insects on the ground. But they also forage in trees, but they're primarily terrestrial. So you can see the service that woodpeckers provide by consuming insects from all parts of the ecosystem. The other thing is that we know that woodpeckers are the first responders to insect outbreaks. Now, I know that there have been some serious insect outbreaks in the last many years in our natural forest, and even some in our urban forest. And so, when woodpeckers know there are insects around, available to them, they are drawn to those areas where those insects are. And we don't have actual data to prove this, but there has been one or more studies that have provided enough information to suggest that if the woodpeckers consume insects from newly infested trees, that it is very possible they're actually extending the life of those trees. Because, woodpeckers consume thousands of insects in a day. The other cool thing is that, they're going after insects, and so they're exposing sources of insects that other wildlife don't have access to, right? So by exposing these sources of insects, they're actually allowing a food source for other insect eaters who otherwise wouldn't be able to access those insects. So I always say woodpeckers are very good neighbors. And there is one more benefit to woodpeckers that I would like to mention that perhaps a lot of people aren't aware of, and that is woodpeckers are agents of forest succession. So what does that mean exactly? Well, it means they play a role in the decline of trees, because here is the picture that tells the story. And not all woodpeckers here. You can see that they're nesting. They've made a cavity right here, right? And you notice the fruiting bodies of fungi around here. But you know that the fungi are in other parts of the tree too, not just around the cavity. But as woodpeckers hitch up and down the tree and come in and out of the cavity, and they're brushing up against these fruiting bodies of fungi. And so they're picking up fungal spores on their bellies, on their bills, on their feet, on their head. And so think about this. As they move up and down the tree and they fly from other trees to other trees, particularly those that have some decay or those that are just dying, they're transporting these fungal spores. And in that way, they are really pushing, if you want for a better word, pushing the decline of those trees that are already weakened. Very cool, don't you agree? I mean, they're benefiting, they're serving their own purpose, but they're also benefiting the forest, because a forest is healthier when we don't only have young trees and semi-mature trees and mature trees, but when we have trees in all stages of decline, because they're organisms that are designed to benefit from those trees in all those stages. So applaud to the woodpecker for that as well. All right, so let's just kind of now launch into all the benefits that a dead tree provides. So one of the most unappreciated benefits of a dead tree is that they provide an unobstructed view. And these unobstructed views, because there's no foliage there, right, or very little, are great places, perches for hunting, for seeing prey passing by or prey on the ground, for territorial defense, for courtship, and for capturing insects in flight. Because let's face it, who gets to claim the territory and who gets to win the girl, gets all the assets in the territory and gets their genes passed on. So dead trees play a really helpful role for all these purposes. In addition to that, dead trees, when they have many branches, provide great staging platforms for birds in migration. And here we have cliff swallows, right? So the great thing is this is a place where flocks can gather together, and also where whether they're just about to leave on their migratory trip, or they're just on a rest stop along the way on one of the flyway stops, whatever, they have to eat, right? So these dead trees provide an opportunity for the flock to see in what direction their mates are going, or their members are going, and to see who's successful in finding food and who's not. I mean, who would think about these things when we look at a dead tree? I get so excited when I think about it. So dead trees are also, as you know, a place where a lot of insects are found. So they provide food for wildlife, but they also provide a place for wildlife to store food. So you know all about the acorn woodpecker, I'm sure. But the acorn woodpecker is not the only bird, or wildlife for that matter, that stores food in dead wood. And it doesn't have to be a whole dead tree, sometimes just in decayed portion of a live tree. They're looking for nooks and crannies to store seeds and nuts and fruit and berries, and sometimes even insects for the cooler months of the year when food may not be as available. In addition to that, because thanks to the decay, there are little depressions that occur in the tops of trees and sometimes in the limbs or other parts of the tree that make great anvils for birds and other wildlife to pummel and crack nuts, right? To break food apart and to break the exoskeletons of insects. I mean, who would think of this? And by the way, the birds also use the rough bark of dead trees to clean their bills. All right, and last but not least, I know you recognize this as drumming. This is the downy woodpecker's drumming vocalization. Dead trees are a substrate for communication for woodpeckers. Now, woodpeckers will drum on live trees too, and they'll drum on all kinds of man-made things, right, to make a racket. But it is my understanding that they have a preference for dead trees because the sound will carry farther. So that is one of the last things I probably say about the habitat value of dead trees for now. Oh, no, I'm not finished. All right, so, where there are stress cracks in trees and there are defects in trees, the arboriculture industry considers defects as a potential hazard to trees, right? And I'm always trying to sell, and even they in their literature say that not all defect is a hazard to a tree. But I'm always submitting the idea that defects in trees are habitat elements, and that's how we should first consider them while we're also considering whether or not they're a hazard to the tree. So here's a stress crack, 2 stress cracks. You recognize what's in the one on the left, right? As a Western fence lizard. Now, I don't know whether he's in there to get insects, whether he's thermoregulating, whether he's seeking shelter from a predator, but you can imagine those stress cracks are helpful for all those reasons. And then I wonder if you recognize the species on the right. Brown creeper. I can clearly see 3 here, but David Hoffman, who took this picture, told me there were 4 in here. They were roosting in there at night. So grateful to him for that photo. Then, of course, the Zerca Society tells us about 30% of native bees in North America nest in tree cavities. And I have one particular insect to mention, which I've had opportunity to witness a couple of times, and that is the carpenter bee. A good name for it, really, because I think of the woodpeckers as the carpenters of the bird world. This is definitely a carpenter bee, because this is the bee that digs tunnels in decayed wood, right? And they make these little holes about the size of a nickel, and they create these tunnels, and they bring in they create cells within the tunnels. They bring in pollen, and they lay the egg, and then they close that little section of the tunnel with more pollen for the young to feed on, and they continue going until the tunnels are all filled with eggs and sufficient food for the young to grow. Well, I have this adorable story that I just have always treasured when I witnessed this. So right here, is what we call a woodpecker start. Now, woodpeckers, as you know, go around testing trees, right, when they're in decline to see if the wood is soft enough for them to excavate. So a woodpecker made this start right here, this little hole, right, but abandoned it because it decided for whatever reason that tree wasn't right or the wood wasn't ready or whatever. Well, along came a carpenter bee. You can see its little rear end right here, right, and benefited from the work that the woodpecker had started and just continued tunneling there. And I watched it, his little legs kicking out the frass. Look, you see the little frass here? Is that cool or what? I mean, I just love knowing that the woodpecker actually helped the carpenter bee and saved it some time and effort. All right, so leaving birds kind of an insects, I just want to share what I learned from the California Department of Forestry and Fire Prevention, that in California, we have 35 mammals and 2 amphibians that use dead trees and down wood. And some of the examples of wildlife in general, I don't know that California has, does California have martins and fissures, I'm not sure, might not, or if they do, it's way up in the higher elevations, I'm sure, in the natural forest. Not sure of the range of the American martin and the fissure, but anyway, all these organisms here are known to use cavities in trees and to use dead wood in some manner. So even the flying squirrels, use the woodpecker cavities, I know. But there's the tree frog. There are many species, not many, but there are several species of tree frogs in California. And we also have an arboreal salamander, believe it or not. I think that's just awesome. So we have lots of organisms that rely on dead trees and dead wood. And let's consider now finally, before we get into how to select trees and so on for retention, that the benefits of downwood, because I often say to the tree care people that, okay, let's say you really have to remove that tree. Can you please leave some segments of wood, perhaps the biggest segments, a few of them on the ground, because dead wood has tremendous habitat value. Now the services that dead wood provides depends on the location in which it is, obviously. But here's one clear example of the camouflage value that dead wood can provide reptiles, right? And of course, you can imagine that sometimes they're under the log and they're going after the little rodents that might be coming by, or they may be eating insects or whatever, some reptiles. So, I mean, food and camouflage, right? And shelter. Then down wood also traps leaf litter, which I know and the leaf litter keeps moisture in the soil, right? And also keeps in. They also trap snowpack, right? So it reduces, when they do this, the wood does this, it reduces runoff. And of course, that leaf litter is great cover for organisms in the winter, right? And there are salamanders and other critters under that leaf litter that organisms can feed on. Now, we can leave down wood on a lawn in our backyard, or we can leave it in a park or a botanical garden, whatever. But in California, I suggest, because, especially if they have vacancies like this, right? It's a good shelter from the elements and from the predators. But in California, where things can get really hot, I would suggest it's best to leave down wood in at least partial shade, because boy, it can get hot inside there in that decay inside there. And also suggest leaving the wood parallel to the land contours so that it does its best work to reduce erosion and runoff. And I also suggest partially burying the wood so that it settles in and it's in a much more natural place and then, as it would be in a forest over time. And last but not least, a dead limb over a stream is invaluable for lots of reasons. For one is it gives waterfowl or shorebirds, like the egrets or whatever, the herons, places to rest or to hunt in the water. But these logs can also act as corridors between one side of the stream and the other to allow wildlife to cross the stream. And what else? Oh, that's it. Okay. So here's the first big message. All right. So in developed areas, we've changed the land, and therefore we've changed the rules that apply to the management of dead trees, right? Because safety to people and property always has to come first. So this on the left is what we do. We traditionally cut it all the way down to the stump. But I want to say this, and I apologize for all the underlining, but I purposely underline these words because they really show how conditional it is when we talk about saving dead trees. It's some trees in suitable locations can be managed for safety and retained for a time. So not all trees, not every location, and not unmanaged, particularly if it's where people frequent or the buildings nearby, whatever. And let's understand that a dead tree will eventually fail. And so it needs to be monitored on a regular basis. And so we have to assume that that tree is not going to be there forever and it will eventually fall. So that's why that monitoring is important. And particularly with trees are being retained, dead trees are being retained in areas where there is some people, presence of people or whatever, or maybe a little near some structure, we might want to consider, I recommend we consider getting consultation from a tree risk assessment qualified arborist, because they're the guys that can really assess the risk that the tree poses and make some suggestions sometimes, many times, as to what we can do to reduce the risk of that tree, the risk of failing or the risk of that limb failing. And if you want to find a tree risk assessment qualified arborist, you can go to treesaregood.com and you can find them there. You can find a certified arborist there and those with special qualifications. You can even go there to find, to look for, if you're wondering what kind of tree I should select for my yard, for shade, for, whatever, any purpose, for fruit, whatever, that is a great website for lots of things, all tree related. All right. So because trees have to be removed, or there's a lot of pressure right now because of the fire risk issues, that there are two resources on our website that I want to bring your attention to, and I'll show you just a second in the next slide where you can find them. So these two resources are, the first one on the left is a decision model, and it's called a wildlife habitat / hazardous tree decision model. And basically what it does is it invites people who have a tree that they're considering removing to consider the options before they remove it completely. And it gives lots of good options there, about 5 options, right? The one on the right here is a file that describes how to protect wildlife before removing a dead tree. Because let's face it, not everyone removing a dead tree understands that there may be wildlife nesting or roosting in that tree. Now, nesting obviously occurs for a limited number of months of the year, but wildlife will roost. Some wildlife will roost in there at any time of the year. So I've created this file. It's 2 pages actually, and it gives some really good, specific, concrete tips as to what to consider before we remove a tree. And of course, it gives the message that if there is an active nest in a dead tree, we really should try our best to not remove that tree until the birds have gone. And in fact, we need a permit to remove the tree if there's an active nest and we have to take the nest into rehab or for some reason relocate it. So this is a complicated business, and we cover all this when we train tree care providers. But anyway, I wanted you to know about those 2. And you can find those 2 on our website. If you go to our main page and you look at the resources tab here, you click on this, the drop-down menu will come with all the resources. And I assure you, there's lots more there for you to explore when you have a lot of time. All right. So, a tough reality is, whoops, my thing went too fast. A tough reality is that arborists will tell you that not all tree failures can be predicted or prevented. So that's just for us to be aware that even if we do our best to maintain the safety of a dead tree, sometimes unexpected, unpredictable things happen and the tree fails. All right, so where would we not want to recommend saving a tree? Well, obviously on a busy street with a lot of traffic and people traffic and car traffic, right? So I wouldn't even approach a city or whatever to ask them to retain a dead tree in that circumstance. We also would not want to encourage or waste our time asking that trees infested by non-native pests be retained, because non-native, we always should ask, how did the tree die? It's really important to ask that question. And if we hear the non-native pests killed this tree, then those trees have to be removed and that wood has to be treated in order to limit or try to mitigate, reduce the spread of the pests. So trees infested with non-native pests are not good candidates for wildlife trees. And lastly, trees on the urban wildlife interface in high risk fire zones. I don't think CAL FIRE is going to support a dead tree being here. Okay, so, all right, so the big goal is to retain trees in all successional stages when possible. And in that very first slide I showed you with trees in all stages of decline, that's what I'm talking about, all successional stages. So on the left is a picture of what we call a soft snag, and on the right, a hard snag. Now you can obviously see the difference, right? This one on the left is in a much more advanced stage of decay, and it has practically no bark, if any at all, on it. On the right, you see a tree that looks like it's more, not so much decayed yet, dead obviously, but has a lot of bark on it, right? We want both of those if we had the perfect world. But if you have to choose between retaining a soft snag and a hard snag, I would vote, generally speaking, for the hard snag, because it's likely to stand longer, assuming there are no other conditions about its roots, you know, whatever, or places not flooded regularly, whatever, that we don't know about. So, and you notice this one that the tree carpenter actually removed almost all the limbs, but left little perches for the birds. I thought that was so great. All right, so I would select our hard snag because cavity nesting birds are not likely, woodpeckers won't excavate in this, and cavity nesting birds, even if they find a natural cavity in a soft snag, I don't know how what the likelihood is of them occupying it, because the integrity of the nest itself is not strong because there's no bark to protect it. So it would really make it more susceptible to predators. All right, so where if we had to choose places, our best chance, we would throw our dice for the best chance as to where to retain dead trees, in high habitat locations, of course, is the first consideration, right? And so that may be in areas where there's a lot of tree diversity, a lot of mature trees, different levels of vegetation, different species of diversity of vegetation species. Best place, because there's stuff there for a diverse number of species, right? It's a lot of that kind of habitat supports wildlife in a number of ways. Now, riparian areas are probably the richest habitat, assuming they're healthy riparian areas. And this is a great place to retain dead trees. So if you know of a riparian area and there are dead trees there and anyone's talking about clearing out the dead trees, I would raise my hand and see, let's give this some more thought, because that is the best place for dead trees. And then, you know, we have a number of parks here in Southern California where I've been petitioning for dead trees. They don't want dead trees around next to playgrounds, of course, or picnic areas too close to benches. Naturally, we understand. But so I always keep my eye open for dead trees on the perimeter of the park, or in areas maybe near the work yard where there are not too many people, you know, the public come and go. So perimeters of parks or big, you know, properties are so that if that tree falls at any time, it's not going to hurt anybody or anything. So those are the best candidates. So the next thing is, if you're considering whether or not you think a tree is a good candidate for retention, here's something else to think about. I would be looking for signs of woodpecker work. You know, woodpeckers are the only birds, when you think about it, that leave a history, a work record, you know, of their work in trees. And as you know, I'm sure you've seen this, they love to make cavities at the base of limbs, right here. See, this one's been cut off, right? So look for tree cavities in a tree, because that tells you right away woodpeckers find that tree valuable. Look for woodpecker starts. You remember the one I showed you that the carpenter bee entered? That's what the carpenter bee entered through, that kind of a start, at the beginning of a cavity that a woodpecker abandoned. And I would look for the signs for beetle galleries. And beetle galleries are exposed when bark is removed. And sometimes that's what the woodpeckers are doing. They're removing the bark to get to the grubs behind the bark, you know, deeper in the wood, to consume them. And so these little squiggly, they look like spaghetti, you know, and different insects, beetles make different patterns. The galleries go in different patterns, and they get narrow at first and widen out as the beetle grubs grow and all that. Anyway, the beetles, the woodpeckers are going after the beetles here. So these are all signs possibly that, you know, that this tree is already useful for wildlife and we should try and protect it. We'll save it if we can. So remember, I think I may have told you that we were going to return to the holes in the bark at the get-go. So here are holes in bark. So pause for a minute and compare them. So on the left, we have small round holes, many, and they're close together, right? In the middle, we have oval holes. Sometimes you'll see D-shaped holes. And on the right, you see other holes. But there is, if you think about it and look closely, there is one thing that is very different about holes. Oh, my computer wants to flip forward. So the one that's very different, the holes that are very different from the others, these holes, right? I mean, they're bigger, yes, but what really makes them different is how irregular the circumference is. Right here, see the circumference of these holes? They're all smooth, right? See, the woodpecker, as you know, uses its bill as a chisel. So when it's going after the beetle grubs, what we just, in the beetle galleries behind, they're chiseling. And that's why the circumference of their foraging holes is irregular and not smooth like the exit holes of the insects. And if you're lucky enough and look closely, and the wood is soft enough, you may actually see, if you can see my pointer, right here, see this little spot, these spots here and down here, right here. Those are the claw marks of the woodpecker's claws, right? As they grip the wood. I mean, those claws are like spikes. They go into the soft wood and grip on really tightly because they're doing some major hammering, in the wood. So sometimes you're lucky enough to see the claws of the wood. So this is a sign. If you see this, you know woodpecker is appreciating this tree, and this is another check mark for my let's try and save this tree if anybody's thinking about removing it. All right. So it is possible to retain a tree, of course, and tree care providers can make the tree safer to stay in place by making reduction cuts and heading cuts. That's what happened over here. These are, I think, what they call reduction cuts. But I'm suggesting that, if we can be picky, let's choose the trees to retain that are perhaps maybe 12, 15 feet high and 12 inches in diameter at breast height. Now, in a little while, I'm going to contradict myself. But basically, the message is the larger the tree, the better, right? And as much as you can retain, the better. Because obviously, there's more for wildlife then, rather than, a stump that's 6 feet, right? Or a tree that's where the diameter is maybe, 3 or 4 inches. Not as valuable as a tree like this is. And I also suggest that if you have a chance, that instead of making these blunt cuts at the ends, at the top of the tree and at the ends of the branches, that you see if you can talk them into making what we call these coronet cuts. Now, coronet usually refers to the top of a tree, right? But you can call them coronet cuts, even if they're at the tip of the branch. They'll know what you're talking about. So these are these jagged cuts, and they're particularly helpful if it's a hard snag, because it allows water and bacteria and fungal spores to get in there to hasten the decay of the tree. All right. And let's also be an advocate for dead limbs in living trees. To me, that's one of the compromises in the urban forest, is that, okay, they can't retain a lot of standing dead trees, but man, they could do much less removing of dead wood in living trees. And in some cases, it provides great habitat. First of all, any dead branch is likely to have insect prey, right? But if you have a dead limb, and let's say, as this one was originally, it was way over parking lot. I was probably 18, 20 feet, right? And they were going to cut the whole thing off. And I said, oh, could you please make it leave some? Could you please leave at least 3 feet? Well, they did. Thank you very much. And there were 2 cavity nesting species in here. Now, so what I've noticed over time is that a limb or a tree 4 inches in diameter is wide enough for a small woodpecker to nest in there. But we need the tree care providers to understand that we need this length, to the point where it's not a danger anymore. Of course, if it fell, it's not going to do any great harm, because the woodpeckers, as you know, don't just excavate behind the entrance of the cavity, but they excavate all the way down as far as decay will allow them, right? So we need that depth. All right, so I think we're going to wrap up here pretty soon. So remember I said I was going to contradict myself about what to retain? So here's a perfect example. So here's a tree stump in a parking lot. I mean, a busy parking lot. Trailers come and going, cars come and going, workmen come and going. This stump, when I saw it and took this picture, had 2 cavity nesters in it. Now, I would never in my wildest dreams suggest that you ask somebody to retain a dead tree in a parking lot. That would be the furthest thing from my mind. But I use this also to show that when we consider all dead trees, even if where they're located specifically is a very low habitat area, if the tree is adjacent to a high quality area, like a forest, it is possible that the birds will use it because they can nest here and they can go back and forth and forage in the high quality habitat. You know what I mean? So always consider the adjacent habitat before you rule out saving a dead tree. But of course, in a high use area like that, they're not going to let big honking dead tree stand in place, right? They're going to want to reduce it. So this was no more than 6 feet high. And you see 2 cavities here. There were several others on the other side. Then there's this picky-rooney little stump. This was as tall as I am, just a little over 5 feet. Looky here. Not all woodpecker nested in here. This was in a field. And we thank the mountain chickadee for telling us that even a stump in the right location, I don't know where this was because I didn't take this picture, in the right location, a stump with heartwood rot inside may be acceptable to a cavity nesting bird. So don't ever underestimate the habitat value of short stumps. My last slide. So if you're lucky enough to talk somebody into saving a dead tree, or you can yourself and you have one in your front yard, I would put a sign on there for 2 reasons. One is it tells people that yes, you know that tree is dead, and yes, you've decided for whatever your own reasons are that it's safe to stay there, okay? You've given due consideration, and then you tell them that the tree has habitat value because this says safe for wildlife, food, and shelter, right? So all of a sudden, you have raised the awareness of people. And I always say consciousness raising is irreversible. So let's summarize. Dead trees offer ecological benefits a healthy tree cannot. They enhance forest diversity. Organisms associated with dead trees play important ecological roles. Safety is a priority, and a tree risk assessment qualified person should be consulted when necessary. Right tree, right place applies to converting hazardous trees into habitat trees. Always ask if the tree needs to be removed completely. Regular monitoring is key. And please visit our website for many more resources. And please share what you know. And there's there's the website again right there. Okay.
Wonderful.
Thank you. So how did I do on time? It's almost 8 o'clock.
Yeah, nailed it.
Okay, good. All right.
Which gives us a little bit of time for question and answer. And I did forget to tell people at the start of the presentation that the way we did this last year worked out pretty well. If you have questions, the easiest way to get them to you is with the chat function. So anybody that has a question for our guest tonight, Gillian Martin, should write that into the chat, and then I'll forward it on to her. And your presentation provoked an awful lot of both questions and observations in my mind anyway. And I definitely want some of those signs.
Oh, terrific. I'd be happy to send some to you. We have small ones and larger ones. The large one is about 11 inches, something like that. The small one is about 4 by 5. And thank you to the person who told me, yes, we have fish and pine marten in some remote forest in California. I thought, thank you very much for confirming that. Yeah.
They're getting pretty rare. The fisher got famous a few years ago because they're a threatened species, and there's a wildlife biologist who was finding dead Pacific fishers deep in the woods that had been poisoned by rat poison.
Oh my.
And it was far away from any settled areas, and it took a while to figure out what was causing it, and it turned out to be illegal marijuana grows in the deep woods.
Yes.
And so it's a whole new environmental problem that nobody knew about, that basically just arose in the last 15 years or so.
Yeah, I think now you refresh my memory. I think I have read that. And I think they also put traps out for wildlife sometimes too, don't they?
Yeah, they do, which
Yeah.
do less harm than the rat poison. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that was Dr. Murad Gabriel that discovered that, actually,
Oh,
from Humboldt State.
right. Well, Tim, if you want me your mailing address, I'd be happy to send you some signs. Just tell me how many you want. If you can go to our website, you can see what both of them look like. Look under Nature Store. There's
we'll
not
do.
much there, but yeah, just tell me how many you want. I'll donate them to you. They're not expensive anyway, but I'll donate them to you.
Yeah, we might want to buy a few and hand them out to members, because I'd love to see those plastered all over a lot of our standing dead trees. It's a real shame that we couldn't have you come up and do this presentation live in person, because then you could, I think you'd love to come up here and admire the number and diversity of standing dead trees we have on the coast.
Really?
Yeah, it's really remarkable, actually.
Oh, that's wonderful.
There
Well,
are,
it's been a long time since I've been up the coast. Yeah.
the Mendocino coast is pretty rich in snags, because we have several different things going on. There's a lot of pine forest, and the coastal pines have a fairly short lifespan. 40 to 50 years they start to senesce, and they're serotinous. Their seeds are triggered by fire,
Uh-huh.
and there really haven't been a lot of fires on the coast in about 50 years. And so getting old and starting to die off. And then Caltrans came through and changed the drainage on Highway 1. This was many years ago, 20 or 30 years ago, in a few places, and wound up drowning stands of pine trees. And those, there are several stands. No, it's great, because there are these,
right.
there are these whole snag forests there that were just
Unintended consequences actually good.
There's all these different reasons, but we have a lot. And then there's the Mendocino Coast Botanical Gardens, who manages their landscape wisely for habitat, and they include a lot of snag retention and also large downwood. And
Yeah, I went there years ago. It was so beautiful, the Botanic Gardens there. Yes.
It is, isn't it?
Yes.
Very birdy place.
Yeah.
We had a few years ago, there's one fairly well-known standing trunk. They topped it, so it's about probably 20-25 feet high, and it's an old soft snag now. It's lost its bark long ago, but in its prime, it was used by several different species of woodpeckers, including at least one flicker who dug a big enough cavity that many years later a screech owl used it as a daytime roost, and he couldn't quite fit all the way down inside, so his head would stick out the hole, and it faced directly toward the trail. So he was a celebrity bird for about,
Oh, that's so dear.
I think he was there for 6 or 8 weeks.
Oh.
And yeah, everybody got great views and pictures of that bird, that little face framed in that snag.
That's what, if ever you get great pictures and someone's willing to donate them for education, my arms are wide. I'm always begging for photos.
Well, you have so many already. Yeah, it's marvelous. Yeah, I'll forward you some of those and
Thank you.
spread the word to our photographers who got many a lot better photos than I am.
And
So
I'd love-
I do have a question from our conservation director, Shannon Underhill. This is something that's come up recently, is the question of so-called salvage logging. And this is getting outside of the urban forest where you're talking about and into the managed timber woodlands. But do you have anything to say about salvage logging? This is specifically post-fire, I think, salvage logging. Often after a wildfire, there are calls to go in and salvage the timber out. And I just had an interview with Dr. Tad Hansen that aired on KZYX, in fact, just last week. And so that people can still find that interview on the Jukebox site if they want to hear it. But I'd like to hear your thoughts about that as
Well,
well.
all I know about salvage logging is from him.
Okay. He has a lot to say on it. Yeah.
Yes, and you know, I have to confess, it's been a long time since I've really studied that, and I haven't gotten back to it. So my old brain is a little fuzzy, you know. But it is, you know, I recognize that, you know, we remove a lot of habitat when we do this, and we also destroy a lot of habitat in the process, right? And I know that over time, you know, when a fire occurs, of course, it depends on the intensity of the fire and, you know, all those dynamics, but that there are species that you know, come back to the habitat at certain stages in the forest recovery, right? So, you know, nature intended for fire to happen and for trees to do their thing, and for wildlife to benefit from the forest recovery in all the stages as the recovery evolves. So we're naturally disrupting that whole process. Now, you know, the naysayers will say, yes, but people need wood, you know, and the lumber industry says, well, if we leave, you know, we have a contract to get wood from this forest or this part of the forest. And if we leave the wood standing too long, then the fire beetles come in there and they infest the wood and destroy the quality of the wood. And so the wood's not much good to us if we let the tree stand all that while. So.
Yeah, it's a tough call.
It's a tough call, but you know, I was shocked. I flew to Oregon some years ago to make a presentation on this very topic to the tree care industry in Oregon. And as I flew over Oregon, for the first time in my life, I saw the clear cuts from the sky.
Yeah.
It looked like somebody, I was shocked. You see the fragmentation of the habitat. It looked like somebody took a cookie cutter in the forest and over the mountains and just removed.
Yeah, and it's still being done also in California. The Sierra Nevadas get a lot of clear cuts. You don't hear the phrase clear cut much anymore. They've invented new phrasing because clear cut got a negative connotation with the public.
Yeah.
But the practice is still followed. They just call it different things now. Even age management, and also what's the newer one? Adam Hutchins and I were just talking about this recently. But anyway, the other new thing that's come up is logging operations are sometimes now recast as fire risk reduction projects.
Yeah.
So you hear the phrase fuels reduction.
Fuel reduction, yeah.
And fuels reduction is just a code for logging. And it's getting a little bit farcical with the linguistic gymnastics to try to avoid telling people what's really happening.
Yes, yes. We need to persevere with these messages that we know are true.
Yeah, and I think there's an awareness of that at some level, but as you said, you know, people still need timber products. There's still a lot of money to be made in logging and timber production, which is fine and good. We just need to be honest about it and decide where that should happen and whether there are places where it shouldn't.
Exactly. Yes. And you know, with the whole issue about you know, sustainable buildings and so on, there's a lot of attention, you know, favoritism about building using, keeping wood buildings and using more and more wood for structures because it's a sustainable source, right?
Mhm.
And I don't know if you have it in your area, but where I am, there is, and Cal Fire is encouraging this, there is a plan for the recycling of urban wood, which I think is good. So when trees are removed in the urban landscape, instead of going into a landfill, right, and the companies having to chip all that up and pay for its disposal, they're now creating, there's a whole industry now for repurposing this wood, which is fabulous. So and so there are a number of industries that are now benefiting from this wood that is kept after removal. And there's even a guitar maker, famous guitar maker, I can't put it back now, is using recycled urban wood to make his guitars.
Nice.
Yeah, he has a business, so yeah, so there's some good stuff happening because it means you put less carbon, and if you put it back into the soil, there's more carbon, in the air. And so, right, so yeah, it's a good plan. So there's good stuff happening and still some very worrisome stuff happening. And I think most people, I included, I have to admit, I feel like it's such a huge, complex problem. I don't feel qualified to really, get into it. I feel like there are people with more expertise than I do, like Chad Hansen. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So I work where I feel I can make a difference. And I support other things where owning my voice or signing a letter, I feel I can do that.
Yeah, I think we should stay in touch with you, and I think it would be nice to see if there's a way that we can, some specific methods that to communicate these ideas to the wider public beyond the Audubon group. And I think that there's a receptive audience here on the coast. Even we don't really have what you'd call an urban environment, small towns mainly. But even there's a lot of opportunity to retain some of this standing dead wood and improve the habitat value. And I think we just need to find ways to get that message to the people. And in particular, I'm thinking the handful of professional tree workers. There's not that many of them, and we don't need to educate everybody on the coast. If we could just reach them here on the coast. Right. And get them educated.
Yeah. So I don't know if I talked with you about this before and I wrote you about it. The other hat I wear is I'm the co-founder and co-leader of a program called Tree Care for Birds. Are you aware of this?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So in the training, we wrote the best management practices to reduce impact on nesting birds. But part of the best management practices actually addresses the issue of saving dead wood and trees and saving dead trees. And in the trainings that we do, this is very much a topic. And as a matter of fact, because of our work, and one member in particular who's very well connected. Oh, so the program, by the way, just before I go on, the program is now part of, we started as a grassroots group, but we were folded into the Western chapter of the International Society of Arboriculture. So we are now a committee of the industry in the West, which covers the California, Nevada, Arizona, and Hawaii. But because of the groundbreaking work we did on this, developing these best management practices, the International Society of Arboriculture and those within it who write standards, pruning standards for tree care providers, right. In here now, the last revision had reference to dead wood being valuable habitat, and when possible, if improving habitat can be part of the objective of the work of the industry, so that they should retain dead trees and dead wood and not remove dead wood. It's actually in the industry stand, and now so the industry is no longer recommending what they call crown cleaning. In other words, removing all the dead wood.
Right.
So there is impact already.
Yeah, that's great.
And if any of your tree care companies in your area, I don't know if not everybody, not all tree care companies are a member of the Western Chapter International Society of Arboriculture, but even if they're not, they can attend the next training we're providing. It's in November, and it's on the homepage. The link to go there is on the homepage of the Tree Care for Birds and other wildlife website, treecareforbirds.com.
Nice. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So the word is filtering in, to the industry.
That's great. That's great news, actually.
Yeah, because I've decided that I had to partner with them because they're the ones influencing the decisions.
Right.
Now, obviously, the land manager is the one that makes the final decision, right? But they're the ones who have the opportunity to suggest, well, we don't really have to remove all this whole limb or this entire tree. Are you interested in supporting wildlife? Are you interested in increasing the habitat value of your property? We can do this, we can do that.
That's excellent. There is progress.
Yeah, there's progress.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anytime you see anybody doing a good stewardship thing like that, and you have pictures, send it to me and I'll put them on Facebook and I'll give them a shout out.
Linda Perkins points out that in the logged over young forests that we have here in Mendocino County, there's often a deficiency of snags because all the old wood was taken out. And so we're kind of looking for ways to encourage landowners, including the industrial landowners, to create and retain snag. I know, and I'll follow up her comment that some years ago, the Mendocino Redwood Company, which is the largest landowner in Mendocino County, had a draft of the habitat conservation plan. They wound up abandoning the whole thing, but in that draft, they did propose specific goals for snag retention, and that was one of the highlights of it was that they acknowledged explicitly the value of snags even in the industrial forest. So, as you say,
that's wonderful.
The word is permeating.
Yes. Change of this nature takes so long, and sometimes you make a step forward and a step back, and perseverance is the key to some of these complex issues.
Mm-hmm.
and more voices. Yeah.
Well, that's great. If no one else has a question, then I suppose we're done with tonight's presentation. And I really want to thank you for joining us and giving us such a charming and fun presentation about the value of these what are frequently considered to be unsightly relics.
Right. And if you talk to Chad Hansen again, please tell him Gillian Martin says hi and that I think of him warmly because he was so important to me in the early days when I started the Cavity Conservation Initiative, and I often pull down his book here.
Nice.
Yes.
Nice. Yeah, that guy he's an amazing fellow and a great resource. He's
been around doing conservation advocacy for years, right? Years.
Yeah.
He was a pioneer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, he really was groundbreaker. Okay. Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you everyone for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Yes, thanks everyone. And again, stay in touch on our website. We have all of our information about the next month's presentation there. Next month, we're going to hear about bats. So there's a direct tie-in, right? Because bats are one of those mammals that will definitely make use of cavities in standing senescent trees. I was just, in fact, yesterday walking the woods with Adam, and he was pointing out the basal cavities in old growth redwood and Douglas fir trees. And I think he told me they counted 12 species of bats that had been using those basal cavities.
Oh my gosh. I would love to see pictures of that.
Yeah, they're spectacular. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there you go. That's next month. We'll have bats. And again, watch for the newsletter and check back with us about the big day, the global big day of birding on October 9th. And we'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, well, thanks for getting that.
Mhm.